So I was just thinking about that great work by William Golding, The Lord of the Flies. If you haven't read the book, it's about some young schoolboys that are trapped on an island and they try to live in a society that they create, and they eventually fail, and one group of boys tries to attack and kill the other group of boys. And the book has certainly been panned or come under fire frequently for being too violent or portraying a view of human nature that is incorrect. The book, it seems, does portray, if nothing else, a way that human beings can go, because it seems that we are quite capable of immense amounts of violence. And in that respect, Lord of the Flies does show us something of the element of human depravity, how far we can go with our violence and our awful angels, the angels of our lower spirits. Now, I can talk a bit about how the book borrows from Beowulf, because it does it. It's a lot of imagery there from that Anglo-Saxon work Beowulf, and there's a lot of imagery in the book from King Arthur and the Arthurian stories, and there's even imagery from classical mythology. One of the characters who gets killed in the story floats out to sea and is subsumed into the ocean, surrounded by these glowing lights. He becomes one with the stars in a way, and although it's sad that he gets killed, and one could say, well, the only character that made sense in the book gets destroyed, and that's not good. Nevertheless, he is transfigured in the way that the classical world saw heroes being transfigured. They become gods, they become stars, constellations. And so the one character in the book does seem to become a heroic constellation set in the stars for people to remember. So classical mythology. But the question that comes up to me is not so much whether or not Golding portrayed human nature accurately, or whether he portrayed an aspect of human nature accurately, because I think he did, but whether or not art in and of itself should portray such things. It gets more to the question of what is the nature of art? What is art supposed to do when we are crafting art? What are we supposed to be creating? Does art create merely beautiful things? Or should it create hideous things as well? I think there's a lot to be said for the idea that art is supposed to be crafting high, noble, beautiful things that we could aspire to, that we could try to emulate, to appeal to the higher angels of our spirit. I think art's job is, to some degree, to inspire human beings, to show us greatness. Certainly Plato says this in the Republic, that we should only make artwork that inspires and encourages and emboldens and empowers people. Artwork seems to do that when we have a great symphony, or we have a great movie of triumph, or a book about heroism. It shows us what human beings are capable of, and we are capable of great things. But there seems to be another aspect as well to artwork. Call it dark artwork, maybe. A negative side of artwork. One that shows us what the depths of our spirit can fall into as well. Sort of a caveat, a warning. This is a form of artwork where we see the worst of our failures, and we can see just how bad things can get. I liken works like Dante's Inferno to this, or certain stories by Flannery O'Connor, or some of the war stories that we get from World War I or World War II, some of the great epics, novels and the like from that. The depths of human awfulness Go way back. We can even look to works like the Iliad, for instance, as to how bad things can really be. And in that sense, art is supposed to show us that this is not the way that we should be. Maybe that perhaps this is a possibility, and that we have a tendency to fall into these awful things. But that's not what we should be. That's not what we should aim for. And in that respect, I think that William Golding's work, the Lord of the Flies, is very much a warning for the modern era, to show us how bad can things get. In our nature, are we going to fall into violence? Or are we going to be able to pull ourselves out of violence and be able to live civilized? And keeping in mind, of course, that his work, written during or at the end of World War II, near the end of World War II, because he was in World War II himself, had seen so much devastation and destruction of society that it was quite obvious that human beings were capable of terrible stuff. And in that book, the original character that turns evil is not a good boy to begin with. In fact, he's rather a dictator from the start. There was an experiment that was done in the 19th century, 17 and 1800s really, which was the state of nature experiment. It was a thought experiment. And it was an experiment where you posited what would mankind be like in a state of nature. In other words, outside of the influences of society, at our most primal stage, the root of what we are. What is a human being? And Jean-Jacques Rousseau, one of the great thinkers of the French Enlightenment, said that human beings in a state of nature are beautiful, wonderful, generous, giving. His famous quote was, "A man was born free, and everywhere he is in chains." Rousseau held that society itself made us evil, made us trapped. And that same line of thinking flows into the American Romantic movement during the 19th century. People like Walt Whitman, for instance, or Henry David Thoreau, followed in Rousseau's footsteps and held that human beings outside of society and society's influences could be very good. It led to a whole movement to get young kids out of the big cities and into nature, going out into the world and experiencing nature. The development of young people free from the constraints of society was the idea. But there was a counter side to it, and this was the Hobbesian side. And Hobbes, Thomas Hobbes, suggested, he had lived through the 1600 Civil War in England, and he suggested that human beings in a state of nature are not good, that the state of nature is actually a state of war. And in the state of war, human life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Human beings in a state of war always try to get one-upmanship upon each other and destroy one another and eat each other. Hobbes had a very dark vision of human beings, that in our natural state, we are not good. And Hobbes's side of seeing things kind of led to a counter movement in American thought, counter to what are called the transcendentalists, were a movement called the anti-transcendentalists. The transcendentalists, like Henry David Thoreau and Walt Whitman, held that human beings were very, very decent, and we had to just get them out of society and out into nature in order to reveal that they're good. We had to transcend all these conventions of human creation of society. The anti-transcendentalists kind of followed in the line of Thomas Hobbes, and they said human beings at heart are capable of great evil. Maybe not corrupt completely, but capable of great evil. So Edgar Allan Poe, for instance, and Nathaniel Hawthorne and Herman Melville, these characters held that human beings, Herman Melville wrote a book called Billy Budd, where the main character, is killed because he hits a man for tormenting him. The man tormented him for no reason, really, except for that Billy Budd was handsome. Walt Nathaniel Hawthorne wrote the great book Scarlet Letter, showing that the main character there was not tortured simply because the society tortured her. She was tortured by her own inner sense of right and wrong, and her own conviction that she was a sinner that could not be saved. So you have these transcendentalists and anti-transcendentalists in American thought, and they held that the state of nature was good for the transcendentalists, and the state of nature was corrupt or evil for the anti-transcendentalists. And I think that line of thought could be traced even further back. But whatever it is, that thought experiment of the state of nature was a way of looking at what we are at our core, at our heart. And I think that William Golding is doing a similar thing. Golding seems to be suggesting that in the state of nature, we are not very good. We are far worse than what we think we are. But there's more to it than that. Because what I said before is that one of the characters who becomes evil is not even good at the very start. He has a sense of dominating other boys and having his own way and putting things all in perfect order. And the order would be according to his own will. So it's kind of a small Lucifer, even at the beginning of the story. The other character who tries to go up against him and create a society where they all just kind of get along and make laws, and it's kind of a fun time. He's not evil, but he's naive. And he tries to create a society without thinking about the consequences of actions or the possibility that people can be really, really evil. And he ends up being hunted and hounded by the end of the novel. So I wonder about those two sides, the Hobbesian side and the Rousseau side. Is that all there is? And I don't know if that's correct. I think that the third option is a sort of middle way, because that's what Aristotle always said was a virtue, was the middle way between two extremes. And you take, for instance, the historical thinker of John Locke, and John Locke was a guy who said humans are born naturally good, made in the image of a creator, but they have a tendency to be quite evil, and we have a temptation to be quite evil, and we can become extremely evil, extremely bad. And Locke pointed out that in order to prevent the real badness in society, we have to create a government, a social contract with one another, in order to prevent the really evil from doing harm to people that want to be good. So Locke's sort of a middle way. He suggested that people are good and we desire goodness, but we have a tendency to fall into great evil. And it's our government, the United States government, is actually based primarily on Locke's ideas. I think William Golding is actually suggesting something like that. His middle way, which comes through the character, one of the characters who confronts this beast that shows up throughout the novel. His character is Simon, is one who seems to see that human beings are capable of great evil, and yet they also desire goodness. And that middle way, I think, is what Golding is suggesting is the way to have to be truly human. So why does he get such a bad rap? I think that probably he gets a bad rap because his evil people are truly graphically evil. I mean, their actions are barbaric and horrendous and rapacious, and just it's very startling to see that in a novel. And people who read that, I think, are turned off greatly by that. They don't see, on the other hand, the attempt to create a good society failing. They don't see the middle way at all. They just see the really graphic awfulness of the bad characters. But I think that speaks to another aspect of the novel, which is Golding is really asking the question of whether or not we question our own beliefs and our own ways of doing things. I think Golding would say that most people don't question why they do what they do, and they live a life that is empty of wonder or thought about why they do the things they do. They go rote memory or tradition. They don't think that they're capable of great evil, and they don't think that other people are capable of great evil, and they can't conceive of great evil. So when evil happens, they're rather startled by it. They're taken aback. They have no preparations for it at all. I think that's Golding's real warning. It's that look at the course of history, look at the course of literature, look at the course just of very recent events. And what you'll find is that this is something which we do over and over again as humans. We fall into great evil. We have the potential for great evil. And when evil occurs, it is on a very large scale. Auschwitz and Treblinka and Dachau and the killing fields of Cambodia and the slaughter that occurred under Joe Stalin and the Cuban slaughter after the revolution and all these different things that people are capable of doing. Wow, is that really for real? Does that really happen? Perhaps Golding is telling us, don't be so naive. Don't be so blinded by your own complacency and your own traditions that you don't think that things can be really, really bad, because that's when you are open for real destruction. Anyway, it's a great novel. If you haven't read it before, read it. William Golding, The Lord of the Flies. Thanks so much. Be seeing you.